Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Williamsburg City Council work session of February 6th. Mr. Trivett, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers? Here. Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Pons?
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Here.
And regretfully, Ms. Kern-Scheerer can't make it today, so we have a matter of special privilege is consideration and approval of a remote participation request from Stacy Kern-Scheerer for the February 6th work session due to illness. Is there a motion?
So I move that City Council approve the remote participation request from Councilmember Stacy Kern-Scheerer for the February 6, 2023 work session.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you all. Thanks for, glad to be here, even if I am not up to par health-wise, so thank you.
Okay, takes us to item 4 on the agenda, which is items for City Council meetings of February 9th. Council preview, Mr. Trivett.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We have a couple of public hearings. The first has to do with the Campbell Archaeology Center at 400 South Nassau Street. The next one has to do with the rezoning of property that the city purchased for the new public works yard adjacent to the municipal building. And then we have 2 requests for the granting of easements to Dominion Energy for underground wiring projects on Capitol Landing Road. Under new business, we have a housekeeping ordinance to clean up the administration of transient occupancy tax. And then, of course, closed session.
Thank you. All right, so it takes us now, this is an opportunity for public comment. If there's anybody in the audience who would like to come forward and address council on any matters, please come forward. Seeing none, I'll close that public comment period and brings us now to background presentations. And first we have a presentation by the Occasion for the Arts detailing events outcomes for FY23 and the plans for FY24. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
Excited to have you here and even more excited about 2024.
Thank you.
Let's
get through 2023.
2023. I'm a visionary. I look far ahead.
Good afternoon, City Council. My name is Amy Ahearn, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the newly elected president of An Occasion for the Arts, whose board is an all-volunteer, yet all full-time working board. With me is Nancy Wigley, who is the vice president of the board and who is the immediate past president of the last 4 years. And I feel like Nancy is much better equipped than I to give this presentation. So with your indulgence, I will turn it over to Nancy Wigley.
Welcome.
I think I told you last year it'd be the last time you saw me. I lied.
Amy wasn't going to let you get away with that.
So here we go. 2020 review, plans for 2023. 2022, the show that wasn't. It almost was. Almost. We came close. We came within about 2 days of having a show. We were all in place. We had 140 artists committed to the show, ready to bring back 2 performance stages after COVID had kind of whittled us down to 1. All of the Williamsburg, James City County schools were committed to the youth art exhibition. We had a really nice community area ready to set up with Steve Prince, who was going to be working on his community quilt project. The Williamsburg Contemporary Art Center was back. All the sponsors had booths. It was going to be a really great weekend. We were ready. We were ready for the artists, 140 artists from 27 states. We were able to refund 85% of their booth fee. This is a standard among art shows of our caliber, and we are a very high caliber art show, that if you cancel, the artists really need their money back as much as you can give them. If you don't give them their money back, you probably won't get those artists back next year, and they will spread the word that this is not an art show that has the financial wherewithal to be able to manage something of this level of catastrophe. So being able to refund the 85% of their booth fee made them all very happy. And we also are waiving their application fee, not their booth fee. We're waiving their application fee for 2023. And they were all very satisfied with this. So moving on. We were ready for the performers. The performing part is a huge part of our show. 27 live performances were scheduled. All local artists, local performers, local groups, local dance groups, magicians. You know, this is one of the ways that we love to support the community by taking our resources and spending it on other organizations that exist in our community. All the Williamsburg, James City County schools were committed, along with the Upper York County and a lot of private schools. We're ready for our youth art exhibition that we host every year, with usually about 700 pieces of art. That was 2020. We have we theme the youth art. We gave them something to kind of grab onto, and we're going to continue that theme for this year, and that theme is connections. Not something they are required to do, but it gives them a framework to work in. Community area, we were ready. Steve Prince was going to come with his community quilt project. I don't know if you know about this. He's in the process of making this quilt that, when it's done, will run from the Wren building down to the Capitol, all the way down to Gloucester Street. So it's an exciting multi-year project, and we were going to be a small part of it. And hopefully we'll be able to get him back and do that project again this year. We had it all ready: beer, food, wine. We were ready to go. We had over 70 volunteers in place to put the show on, along with our entire board, who is dedicated to the entire weekend. And like Amy said, we are a board of directors, all volunteer and all working full-time still. So this is a big commitment for all of us. We were ready for our new adventure, an evening for the arts. A Friday night fundraiser to support a new program we are putting in place. This is a ticketed event. It included an artist preview. All the artists were on board. We had live music. Great food was ready to be served by a lot of local Merchant Square restaurants. We were ready. We are ready for this program, an artist in residence program. This is an expansion of an occasion for the arts. Where we will secure funding through the Williamsburg Area Arts Commission and the Virginia Arts Commission, work with Williamsburg, James City County Schools to select one school, and we do an artist selection as well. This year will be a local artist, and it's a 1 to 2 week intensive program in the school that results in a public art project, a public art installation. What this does is, it's a great program for schools. Really gives a lot of these kids something they haven't had the opportunity to do, to really work collaboratively with a well-known artist. And it expands an occasion for the arts beyond that one weekend. We now become something in the community that this year is in this school, and next year is in another school, and in the following year. And we'll have some programming around these art installations as well. So it's a way for us to expand our footprint after 55 years of that one weekend per year. By partnering with our schools. So the school system is very excited to be a part of it. So how do we use our city funding? City funding is extremely important to our program. We now have a very robust $25,000 minimum marketing program where we partner with Consociate Media, and they have been great. We now have a paid contractor, our executive director, Robin Markowitz, who is amazing. We pay her a salary of $30,000 a year. And of course, you give us money, and then we give it right back by hiring all your city police officers and EMS to the tune of about $10,000 a year. So you give the money to us, but we make sure it goes right back into our community. So we are moving forward in 2023 under the direction of Miss Amy Ahearn. Will hopefully be one of our best years ever. We are extremely grateful for the support that the city provides in numerous ways, and not just the funding, but our work with the city planning office and the police and the fire, who all make this event go smoothly. And we couldn't do it without you guys. So. Thank you for your consideration.
Well, thank you. And let me just say, it was unfortunate that it had to be canceled last year. I know it's kind of a signature event for the community, not just the city of Williamsburg, but the greater, the historic Triangle area, and people love it and come from all over the world really to be there. And so it was sad that it wasn't able to happen. Those late hurricane seasons, just hit us. But you had said that the funding is very important, and extremely important to the Occasion for the Arts. But I think moreover, what Occasion for the Arts does for the city downtown is extremely important as well. So we certainly look forward to continuing that support and having you all back next year and in years to come. And so thank you very much for all the volunteer work that you all put into this. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you for the update, and as the mayor stated, I think it's important to recognize your board, and you said it in the beginning and said it again in the presentation, that it's all volunteer, and without those volunteers, this event wouldn't be successful. So everyone's excited to see it come back in '23. Keep our fingers crossed to no weather again, and also what it brings to the city is very important. So thank you for all the work that you do and all of your volunteer members, and for being steadfast and bringing this back again.
Do you want to ask Stacy?
Stacy,
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Overlooked you since you weren't sitting there.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation and such a wonderful program. And I share in your excitement about the expansion with the program with the WJCC schools. I love this idea of partnering with the schools, and then also what you said about really expanding the footprint, from what we think of the Occasion for the Arts and expanding in the schools. So I just wanted to say, thank you to your entire team and the leadership that you have and the vision that you have for expanding and reaching our children in other ways. It's really appreciated, and I think it's a wonderful idea.
And I would just like to echo what everyone else has said, and just to confirm that you're planning on doing the same things for 23 that you had planned for 22, to include the evening, Friday night evening, the community art project, things like that.
Yeah, we plan for the Artist in Residence program to take place during the 2023-24 school year.
Okay. And the dates for 23, I can look up on the calendar.
October, the first full weekend in October, the first
6,
full
7, 8.
weekend. So 6, 7, and 8.
Okay, thank you.
And I echo all that's been said. Thank you, Nancy and Amy, for your leadership. It was disappointing when the Occasion for the Arts was canceled this past year. I don't know what kind of lateral we have this year with any unspent funds, but I hope, if any, there may be some ability to have lesser booth fees or potentially more acts that will be there. But I'm excited to actually go, and we'll knock on wood for there to be not any natural occurrences which make us push back the date.
This is only the second time
Right.
in 54 years that the event was canceled for weather.
But it can't happen 2 years in a row.
Although, president for 4 years, I only put on 2 shows.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
thank
And hopefully one of these years we can expand the container cups a little further out, other than,
We talked about that, yes.
as I look over at city manager, get him working on that.
Thank you.
Oh, if you could get that done by October, that would be amazing.
Thank you, ladies. I appreciate all that you've done to get us to this point, and look forward to seeing you in October.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, takes us next to presentation from the Williamsburg Area Arts Commission's outside agency funding recommendations for FY24. Tom Phelps. Good afternoon, Mr. Phelps.
And council members. It's my pleasure to be here today to speak about the work of the Williamsburg Area Arts Commission. And I do so on behalf of the commission, and if I might, I'd like to introduce those who are here today and ask them just to stand briefly so you can get to kind of know them. You know some of them already: Susan Corbett and Robin Phillips, and of course Patricia Rublein, who's the former chair, Barbara Vollmer, saw her come in, and Nick Fredos. These people all try to work on your behalf. And
Thank you for being here.
And we come before you to recommend awards to 29 arts and cultural organizations that together will present more than 200 programs, projects, or exhibitions to residents, tourists, convention goers, and many other interested individuals during this year-long cycle that this slate represents. Would be actually 24. Works, it does. For example, with funds from the council and other sources of funding, Flute Frenzy, an orchestra of flutists of all ages who play a wide range of variety of flutes, yes, only flutes from piccolo size to the big bass tones. The orchestra plays concerts in several auditoriums in James City County and Williamsburg and Yorktown. Some give smaller concerts and individual instructions in the schools, and they have summer camps for young artists. Many play at events like Occasion for the Arts and holiday concerts in Merchant Square, so they're about. And then the Institute for Dance, we have a picture on the side there, is an example of projects that not only perform for the community, but also teach students of all ages and abilities. While iDance raises additional support from many sources, the Williamsburg Area Arts Commission funds are used primarily for performances, the Christmas Dreams and the annual showcase, where dancers of all ages come together to dance, 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 showing off the many things that they have learned and the ways that they have learned how to perform. The Williamsburg Players, a remarkable community-based theater organization, has a season of plays and musicals that enrich the lives of the community. At the Playhouse, talented community members are selected from open auditions. They rehearse and then present a season of dramas, comedies, and musicals with wonderful sets and lighting that are all designed and constructed and staged by community members. Community theaters like this, all volunteer operation, are primary institutions of cultural activity deserving of the Commission's support in our eyes. And while the area-wide government supports the Ampersand International Arts Festival, used to be the International Film Festival, as you may remember, which looks to be a jewel in the community's crown, the Area Arts Commission recommends some additional support to attract artists and performers who come to present their arts, largely film, and to pay for their travel and to come to Williamsburg during the festivals. But not only does this festival attract performers, but it also attracts visitors and tourists to the area for the festival itself. This festival accomplishes the essence of what the Williamsburg Area Arts Commission's goals are, which is to encourage and present the arts to members of the local community and to attract visitors from far and wide to come to take part in festival attractions, to learn about the arts and culture, and enjoy the arts and culture here in Williamsburg. This project is a primary example of how arts and culture, I think, breed economic development. And finally, the example here is the result of recommended for the arts culture here in Williamsburg Symphony. The Williamsburg Symphony, of course, is a remarkable organization. Not only does the Williamsburg Symphony present 5 major concerts each year, but members of the orchestra play at senior centers, play and teach in the schools, play for the other arts like ballet concerts, and encourage and recruit young musicians and teach them techniques and how to perform as soloists in small groups such as quartets and quintets and in the orchestra as well. These examples are only a few of those of the WAC recommendations to the Council for support, but I want to note, however, that we are recommending the budgeted amount of $159,000 flat funding for the last few years. We received requests, however, for $230,000, and as you can see on the chart in front of you. We also received 34 applications, but the Commission, staying in with those budgetary limits, is not able to fund either all of the requested amounts nor all of the organizations who have applied. But we think still that our recommendations are sound and based on keen deliberations among the commissioners as the grants proposals came in. Before I close, I'd like to mention that this coming Thursday, February 9th, which is just day after tomorrow, the Commission, with the Council's support, is conducting a workshop here in these chambers right here on how to develop and increase audiences in a post-pandemic environment, which I think is an important subject that will be of interest to many, many, and we've already had nearly 100 registrations. We have 4 fine panelists who will present views and techniques on this subject, and we will have, I hope, a healthy question and answer period following and a chance for them to mingle out here in the gallery space. We encourage you to come day after tomorrow. Put it on your calendars, 9 to noon on Thursday, February 9th. Mr. Mayor and council members, that concludes my remarks, and might I answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. I appreciate you being here today and all the members of the commission. I know it's no easy task to receive these applications, essentially pick winners, pick losers, and because I think in all of our minds, people that participate in the arts and cultural activities are all winners and bring a lot to our community and inspire us in so many different ways. And so not being able to fund everyone isn't pleasant. But that said, I know that you all spend a great deal of time and put a great deal of thought into how to disperse these funds, recognizing that it isn't an unlimited source of funds. So I certainly do appreciate that. So I don't have any questions, but just wanted to thank you for your efforts and the efforts of the commission. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Phelps, and I don't have any questions. I too would just like to thank you for the work that you do to make these recommendations, and know it's not an easy task. And to continue to do what all the events that you discussed and still come in still make a request at level funding is admirable. So thank you.
Ms. Kern-Scheerer?
I just want to say thank you. The work that you all are doing and the organizations that you highlighted and the other ones, even that you didn't, are just doing such important work in the community, and the art and the culture that everyone brings is just it's necessary for a thriving, successful town. And I'm so appreciative to you all as volunteers, and just want to also echo, I appreciate the hard decisions that you all make, and I know you make them with such thought and care for the community and the artists and the audiences. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you.
And I will echo the thanks again. All of the organizations on the chart enrich our lives and improve the quality of life for all residents and for visitors. So very important work that you do. Thank you.
I certainly agree with all the above, Mr. Phelps. So thank you for the presentation. You highlighted that interesting panel day after tomorrow, and I have to think probably the hardest part in your work is not so much the engagement of musicians still today, but maybe the visitation from people coming to these events in that, as you mentioned, post-pandemic world. So certainly the level of events you hold is commendable, but as it is helping people figure out how to actually have the level of attendance they once did. So thank you for all that you do, including cultivating that audience growth.
It's difficult to come back. It's difficult for them to get the audience levels up, but it's also, I think, part of what they have to encourage the people to get back into the whole habit of attending these kinds of things. But it's of interest to all of those that perform, I think, in the communities, and I think that's true. We hope we can help them Thursday.
Thank you.
Did you have something you wanted to add? If you'd like to come to the podium?
I was just going to say it's Thursday, which is
Thursday.
2 days
day
from
after tomorrow. So that's all.
Oh, it's not today. Oh, no, it's 2 days after tomorrow. But I don't know. Calendars are very difficult for me.
2 days after tomorrow.
Right.
Thanks, Joanna. She also is our savior,
Yeah, good.
We very much appreciate her.
Well, we're glad she's able to keep all of you in line, so to speak.
That's right. There's no question about that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Phelps.
Thursday. She has to point out to me what Thursday is.
That's right.
That's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is a presentation of the Health and Human Service Partnership Agency funding recommendation. We have Mr. Morgan with us today. Don't take that and bring it back Thursday.
Don't
Welcome, Mr.
worry, there's
Morgan.
no PowerPoint slides for this one. Good afternoon, Mayor Pons, members of City Council. My name is John Morgan, and I serve as Chair of the Williamsburg Social Services Board. I'm here on behalf of the Board to present you our recommendations for grant funding. The other members of our board includes, I'd like for her to stand up and be recognized, Susan Kern, who's in the back of the room. And in addition is Melinda Marriott, Mike Sidlowski, and our newest member, Max Berkmuller, who is a student at William & Mary. As you are aware, the Social Services Advisory Board has assumed the task of reviewing the Human Service Partner Agency grant applications on a yearly basis. The board meets twice during the last week of November and in early December to review the applications and decide on recommended funding. As in previous years, the board takes several things into consideration when reviewing applications and making recommendations to the council. 5 questions that we consider are: does the agency provide both necessary and direct services to city residents? Are the services non-duplicative and cost-effective to city residents? Are the services provided by the agency accessible and affordable with no one being denied due to inability to pay? This includes free services or sliding scale options for individuals. Does the agency work closely and network with the city's human services staff and other agencies so not to cause duplication or fragmentation of services? Is the amount of funding the City Council provides proportionate to the amount of neighborhood localities provide relative to the percentage of residents served by the city? Also, for agencies requesting for more than a $10,000 grant, our board members also review their audit reports. In the current fiscal year of 2023, the city is funding 15 outside agencies in the human services area, and total funding for these agencies equals $477,159. The majority of the funding of supporting Old Town Medical and Dental Center and Colonial Behavioral Health. We have included a one-page chart in your packet outlining the agency requests and recommendations. For the fiscal year 2024, all the agencies reapplied for funding with the addition of 2 new applications. Also, part of the requests include Peninsula Commission of Homelessness, which is a joint exercise of power of 6 jurisdictions. This agreement remains at $2,759 per year per contract, with Newport News serving as the fiscal agent. Now, 9 of the 15 applicants requested an increase in funding for the fiscal year 2024. Taking into consideration the limits to the city's budget, we are recommending continued funding for all the agencies, but not all of them at the fully requested amount. We looked closely at the agency budgets and number of city residents served by the programs to ensure the funding was reaching the most city residents. The committee also reviewed 2 new applications from Lackey Clinic and Fish. Lackey Clinic is a free and charitable healthcare center in the Lackey area. Lackey Clinic requested $30,000 in funding, but according to the application, only 1 city resident has been served this year, and there's a prediction of serving 5 city residents in the future. It is assumed that many of our residents choose to access services through the Old Town Medical and Dental Center rather than traveling to Lackey. The committee does not recommend funding, but supports the efforts of Lackey Clinic and anticipates that there might be an opportunity in the future to partner with them. Fish was also a new application for funding. As you are aware, Fish has recently moved its operation to 2nd Street in the city. Fish is an all-volunteer agency providing food, clothing, and housewares to residents. Fish predicts that will serve an estimated 1,260 city residents for fiscal year 24. Based on services and support that Fish provided for our residents, the committee is recommending funding them at $5,000 level. In summary, the Social Services Advisory Board has taken a considerable amount of time to review the partner agency requests. Our recommendation is to continue funding the 15 agencies, increasing some of the agencies, and adding support for the new application from Fish. This total funding would amount to $507,459, which is a $30,300 increase from the previous year funding. We want to continue to support the nonprofit agencies and the incredible work that they do for our community and citizens. We also want to thank you once again for the opportunity to conduct the review of the applications and present you with our recommendations. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and also Ms. Evans is in the room here from Human Services.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I appreciate your presentation, but I moreover really appreciate the detailed nature in which you went through and amplified the 5 questions that you ask of each applicant to help understand what their application brings to city residents, and understand that, you know, the conflict of not supporting Lackey, but you know, as much as we want to, you know, because it does offer a duplicative service to what we see at Old Town and the lack of numbers of city residents there, I think that's a good decision. And so I do recognize that, you know, there is an increased request, which I know council will certainly consider, and look forward to seeing the city manager's recommendation. You know, this is a core function of what we do, is to help people that need help, no matter what it is, putting out fires or, you know, getting health care. So it's tough to see these types of requests, but it's even harder on us, I think, to see people who are in need. So thank you for taking the time, and thank you all the board members the committee members that work to evaluate the applications and come back with a recommendation. So appreciate you spending the time to do that and being here today.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Morgan, and to all the board. I know it's a difficult task to go through this review process when we recognize that all of these agencies provide necessary services to our community. So we appreciate that the difficult decision process you had to go through. And obviously, even though it's an increase, we'll take that into consideration moving forward, and your advice today and the board's advice and how you came to this determination will play a big role in our decision making. So thank you.
Ms. Kern-Scheerer?
Yes, just thank you for articulating the principles upon which these decisions are based. It's very clear from your explanation, you know, how much care is really put into reviewing the requests and making these recommendations. So I appreciate all of your work, and certainly appreciate these organizations for what they do in our town. So thank you.
And once again, I reiterate comments that have already been made. Appreciate the presentation, the clarity with which the decisions were made. As everyone recognizes, it's hard to say no to agencies that provide so many good services to our community, but again, appreciate that, and it makes your request that much more credible when we review during the budget process.
Thank you.
And I echo all words of thanks, Mr. Morgan. Every agency that you all oversee is certainly eligible and deserving of all requested funds and then some. And the city isn't immune to budget constraints just like other organizations aren't, but we are certainly excited after the budget retreat to get to support some of these groups. So I thank you and your organization for all the reviewing that you did and listening to proposals over the last year. And I look forward to actually getting to send the next tranche of funding to some of these fantastic organizations soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Appreciate you being here today. Okay, so the next presentation is not a request. But we welcome Mr. Greg Grootendorst from the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, who's going to give us an update on the economic forecast. As you all know, the city has a seat on the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, and unfortunately for them, I'm chairing it this year. So we asked Greg to come and give the presentation that he presented a few weeks ago at the Planning Commission meeting, and I thought it was a lot of good information in there. So welcome, sir. Glad to have you here. Hopefully you didn't get lost on your way in.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Trivett, members of council. Happy to come present here to you. Hopefully I can get my presentation pop up. Is it good to go? There we go. Look at that. So each year since 1990, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission has done an annual forecast, economic forecast for the region, and that's what I'm about to share with you now. As an economist, I'm a little bit embarrassed to forecast because economists are terrible at forecasting, and yet we do it anyways. But the reason for that is I think forecasts provide an opportunity to look at the current landscape, the economic landscape, and get a sense of what's happening, what things we might expect in the future, and what things we can be concerned about, and certainly lend us a lens of what's going on today. So they do have their use, but in terms of actual forecasting, economists have no idea what's going to happen in the future, just like everyone else. So with that said, just going to point you to the national economy real quick. Here we have two lines. The blue line is potential gross domestic product, and the red line is actual gross product. And from what you can see here, the red line way underperformed the blue line through the Great Recession. And you can see the difference of the experience of the Great Recession versus the COVID recession. Very different economic experiences there. And so every time we're right around the blue line, the economy is performing where we would expect it to be if everything is hitting the mark and everything's running as it should. When it surpasses the blue line, usually there's artificial stimulus that are making it run faster than it should. And you can see right there, the first two quarters in 2022, we actually saw a decline, which typically would point to a recession. But during that period, as I'll get to, we've been seeing record employment. So you don't really have a recession when you have record employment gains. So this is kind of what's going on with the national economy, and you can see the trajectory that way. If we want to compare this COVID recession to the Great Recession to all other post-World War II recessions, you can see this has been a very different experience. The Great Recession took a long time to recover from. The COVID recession had a very different shape. We jumped back halfway pretty quick, and then the second half of the recovery has taken some time. So this chart here shows us what has been happening with monthly employment gains at the national level, and this is civilian employment, since the beginning of 2021. And what you can see there with the red line is that's the long-term average in terms of employment gains. And we have just been really, really performing well with respect to employment month after month. Every time we're above that red line, we're above the long-term average, and we've been above the long-term average every single month. In fact, the most recent release, which I haven't had a chance to update this, was really high again, over 500,000. So what you can see is there's been a bit of a downward trend over the last couple months, a bit of a softening there. The latest report, the latest release was a bump up again, but again, national employment has been really, really strong. If we look at the industries that have been affected, this compares November of 2022 to essentially pre-COVID. And so you can see at the national level, there's been, not a uniform experience across industries. Right now, national employment's about 1% higher than it was pre-COVID. And the business, professional services, transportation, utilities, and really health services, those three at the top are where we're seeing increases, biggest increases in employment. At the national level, leisure and hospitality tourism essentially has been hit pretty hard, and we still have not recovered to pre-COVID. Local government is suffering. Local government typically takes the longest to respond in such instances, and then you can see wholesale is flat. But at the national level, with a 1% employment gain, you can see different industries have been impacted differently. So if we start looking towards Hampton Roads, we go back to 2005. How has Hampton Roads' experience been different than that of the nation or the Commonwealth? And you can see we have had significantly a different experience here. It took us a lot longer to recover from the Great Recession than it did for the nation, and even now we're recovering very slowly from the COVID recession. If we go back to 2005, the U.S. economy, we have employment that's 15.6% higher than it was Virginia, it's 12.8, and Virginia is only 5.1. And since COVID, the U.S., like I said, is just about 1% back. Virginia is essentially flat, but Hampton Roads is 1.1% lower there than we were pre-COVID. So the way we're pulling out of these recessions has been slower, and this most recent recession, we're in that same boat. If we go back to where we were prior to the Great Recession, we have added, on average, 69 jobs per month in the economy. That's just a little over 2 jobs a day. That's not a significant amount of growth. So our employment is growing very, very slowly, and we're still about 9,000 jobs less than we were pre-COVID. So we're inching back slowly. If you look at the industries in Hampton Roads that have, how they compare pre-COVID, you can see at the top some of the industries that have actually seen growth compared to pre-COVID is transportation, utilities, leisure, hospitality. Now you'll recognize that that's quite a bit different than where the nation was, where tourism was on the bottom. We've actually seen growth since prior to COVID. Construction, there is $5.8 billion worth of construction projects going on in this region right now. That's second most in the nation, but there is a lot of construction happening right now, and we've got a fantastic deal with all the regional money that we put in to pay for these projects, so that's fantastic. Healthcare has been up, scientific technical service. You can see on the bottom end there, again, you can see local government's been hit significantly hard. A lot of local government right now are really having a difficult time recruiting staff and filling positions. The positions are available, but it's a lot more lucrative for a lot of people to join the private sector and make a lot more money there than what government can afford to pay right now. And so filling those positions, those vacant ones, has been tough. Manufacturing, you can see that we've lost out there as well in state government, retail trade. Over the past year, again, you can see that the tourism sector is doing well, as is healthcare, construction. We've lost a little bit of federal government jobs and administrative and support positions. The labor market, this is kind of something that we've seen a lot of news. You go into a restaurant and it's half full, and you have to wait to sit down because they don't have the staff to serve diners. A lot of places that you go across the region, they're looking for help wanted everywhere. So the labor market is very tight. If we look at the unemployment rates, again, here we're comparing the U.S., Hampton Roads, and Virginia. You can see, for the most part, we're all following along the same trajectory. Hampton Roads typically has a lower unemployment rate than the nation, and so we can see how the unemployment rates went up with COVID pretty significantly and then dropped pretty quickly. But in terms of the labor market, right here you'd say, well, Hampton Roads has a lower unemployment rate than the nation, so we must be doing better. And that's not quite how unemployment rates work. If we look at the labor force in Hampton Roads, these are the fundamentals that really build the unemployment rate that people like to talk about. That black dotted line on top, that's what would happen is if you kept our labor force constant since prior to COVID. So you can see the blue line is our actual labor force, and the black line is what it was pre-COVID. So we have a smaller labor force now than we did prior to COVID. The red line is the red bar on the bottom. That's the number of unemployed. But the red bar and the red line on top, those two combined equal the total labor force. So you can see from here, for Hampton Roads, our labor force is almost 5% below where it was. Total employment is 5% below where it was pre-COVID, and the number of unemployed is 17.1%, higher than we were. Compared to the U.S. and the Commonwealth, again, Hampton Roads is not doing as well as we should. So if we start looking a bit differently at Hampton Roads and what's going on in different industry sectors, taking a look at the port. The port has been doing well, really well. You can see here the different lines for 2019 through 2022, and 2021 was a record year for the port. They had their best year ever, followed by 2022, which was an even better year. So 2022 became the best year ever. But the commerce that's going through the port right now is fantastic. A lot of investments have been made there, so the port Facilities have been doing really well. And the records that they've seen year over year now suggest that, what's going on with respect to Hampton Roads and competition with other East Coast ports, we're doing well. We're a strong port, we're a strong facility, and we're seeing these efficiencies. We look at our tourism industry. I had mentioned this before, that the nation had seen a decline in the tourism industry. Hampton Roads, that's a significant drop you see there with COVID. I mean, we really shut down with the tourism sector during COVID. But even with that drop, we were the #1 region out of the top 25 regions during COVID. We had the least drop in tourism activity of any top 25 industry, and we are outpacing the nation now. We've gone back, we've recovered all the jobs that were lost, the revenues that were lost, and we're growing. And it's not consistent across Hampton Roads, but every tourism sector, every subsector in Hampton Roads has seen growth, with revenue per available room called RevPAR, with the number of rooms sold and the revenue that's coming in. So employment in the tourism sector is up, as are revenues. That's really good for Hampton Roads. We typically refer to Hampton Roads having the three legs of the industry. There's defense, there's tourism, and there's support. So if we look at defense is a little bit different in terms of how we see money coming in. But defense contracts are up, so there's a lot of money coming from the federal government to Hampton Roads. They're struggling right now to fill a lot of the military positions, just like a lot of other government. It's more lucrative in the private sector than it is the public sector, and so the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, they're all struggling to hit their targets because people don't want to go into the DOD. That said, we are seeing defense contracts coming in, and that money flows through the economy. The defense industry is responsible for about 40% of the Hampton Roads region's economy, so it's a pretty significant amount. So looking at that, I just showed you three sectors. The three sectors are doing really well. So why are we having such a problem recovering? Hampton Roads typically does take a little bit longer to recover. We go into recessions a little bit slower, and we have our private sector doesn't recover as quickly. But I just wanted to touch on a couple of pieces of the economy that are important to localities, especially with respect to revenue. This is retail sales in Hampton Roads. One of the big components of local budgets is retail sales, and you can see if you're looking at this chart, just looking at it not adjusted for inflation, just nominally, we've had an annualized growth rate of around 3.4%. That doesn't sound so bad, but since COVID, you can see a huge jump in retail revenues, and this has been a boon to local governments because the coffers have been like, wow, this is fantastic, we're getting all this retail money in. And there's a couple of reasons for that. When COVID hit, people really switched from buying services. You couldn't go out and get your hair done. You couldn't go out to restaurants, so you bought goods. People had the money and they bought stuff, and that really pushed retail sales up. But another thing that happened is when you bought electronic sales, the timing was great, but there was a Supreme Court decision, Wayfair versus South Dakota, which meant you could tax and get the revenue from all your internet sales. So that hit at the right time for people to collect this, or local governments to collect this money from COVID. So that happened, and now we've kind of maxed out what we're going to see with respect to retail sales growth. And right now, even if we adjust for inflation, we can see that the inflation-adjusted retail sales is much lower. But this is forecasting this out. We expect the inflation-adjusted retail sales to actually begin declining year over year. We've kind of tapped that out. People are moving back to services, and all the growth that we saw with electronic sales, that is fully maximized now, so we won't see any more growth from that. We're looking at home prices. This is kind of an interesting chart. If you look to the very right, you can see again how Hampton Roads compares to the Commonwealth and the U.S., but everybody was kind of flowing in the same sort of direction, and all of a sudden the housing market stopped. And one of the biggest things that can cool the housing market is increasing mortgage rates. And so when mortgage rates went up, The housing market cooled. We had a relatively hot housing market, surprisingly hot during COVID, and then mortgage rates went up, and the housing market cooled, and now we're looking at something that's, a year or two ago, we were looking at, it was a seller's market, clearly. Well, that shifted to a buyer's market with concessions and everything. But housing prices are traditionally downward sticky, so whatever top price your house was appraised for, people don't want to let go of that, so they're just going to hold on to that price, and they don't want to sell it for less, which means that home prices don't really drop as quickly in reflection of the market as they would increase. So we'll see the housing market cool, and we'll probably see home prices level off for some time, even though effectively they're decreased because we switched, we've got all concessions in the housing market. So the housing market for the next year or two certainly will cool. I know there's buzz nationally because as 30-year mortgage rates are coming back down, we're seeing a little bit of bump, people applying for mortgages again when they had just stopped. One of the components that has been a little bit strange here is inflation, right? 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, nobody was talking about inflation. Local budgets, barely talked about inflation. Now everybody's quite aware of inflation, especially when they go buy eggs, right? But inflation is strangest way. It doesn't hit everything all the same. The reason eggs are so expensive is not so much to do with the supply chain disruptions or just inflation in general, but when you have avian bird flu and you kill 58 million chickens, and you just have a drop in supply, which drives up prices. But there has been a whole lot going on since COVID with supply chain interruptions, decrease in supply, and changes in price levels from various goods, which you can see here. Last year, car and truck rentals were incredibly costly. And so if you were going to go out to Yellowstone last summer, 2 summers ago, and rent a car, you were paying 4 times what you were for a car rental for 2 years previous. Used cars and truck prices went way up. Now they're coming back down a little, but they went way up during COVID when car prices suddenly dropped out. So we've seen these fluctuations go on with a lot of different goods, but in general, inflation is up significantly. It's starting to come down, so it's not factored in all the goods. You can see the growth rate in inflation. There's that black line on the very right side. You can see how inflation's coming down a little bit, but the overall index prices are still really high. You go to the grocery store, prices are still really high, most things you look at. So in response to that, of course, the Fed Reserve is trying to cool inflation by increasing interest rates. And when they increase interest rates, that has the effect of calming or cooling the economy off. And when people say, well, how long are you going to increase interest rates for? It's like, well, until you stop spending money, right? They're going to do this until it hurts, essentially, and they just raise interest rates last week. But if you look at this, you got the orange line there is short-term interest rates, the blue line is longer-term 10-year, and the black line's mortgage rates. And as you would expect, short-term interest rates are lower than long-term interest rates for the most part. When they're not, when short-term rates climb over the long-term rates, it's called an inflated yield curve, and every time that happens, it's a very good indicator of recession. So when you see an inflated yield curve, when people are more bullish about the long-term economy than they are the short-term economy, then there's typically, like, with really good correlation and the R word, a recession coming. If we look to the future, as I started this presentation, I told you economists are really bad at forecasting, so here's an economic forecast for you to look at. But essentially, these are the best of the best economists from the blue chip looking at the forecast for the year out. And you can see for the fourth quarter of 2022, they're expecting a bit of a slowdown from the third quarter, and into 2023, the first 2 quarters, expecting a small decline, a soft landing, and maybe even a soft recession. Not a recession like we've seen back in 2020 or even the Great Recession. But really, we're just seeing a cool down in the economy, and that's expected for the first part of 2023 and then slowly coming out of that into 2024. Our forecast for 2023, you can see on the right there, if we start with the federal level, the expected growth rate for gross product is at 0.4%. The consumer price index is expected to drop by half from 8% to 4%. So 4% is still real inflation. And of course, that's built off the inflation we've already seen. So that is significant. Interest rates for short term, we expect those to be a little bit higher than long term. Like I said, that's inflated or inverted yield curve, so that's a sign of probable recession when that comes. When we look to the regional economy, our gross product for expectation for 2023, 1.3%, is outpacing the national economy. So we expect that Hampton Roads' economy in 2023 will actually be better than that of the nation. I showed you what was happening in the tourism sector, the defense sector, and the ports, so we've got a lot of momentum going right now and strong growth there, so I think we'll do well. With civilian employment, I think we'll continue to see some of the gains that we've seen in recent years as we slowly grow the labor force. Unemployment rate is expected to be about the same. And retail sales, that's a nominal number of 3.6%. So when you compare that to consumer price index, I expect we'll see very slow retail sales growth, but once you adjust it for inflation, it'll actually be decline. I just wanted to end here with some ongoing regional initiatives. Of course, we're always trying to make Hampton Roads improve the region and improve the quality of life for residents. And like I said, we got $5.8 billion in regional infrastructure projects going on. That has just been really, really good for the economy, but it also sets us up for growth in the out years as we expand the 64 all the way to Richmond, the HRPDC expansion, high-rise bridge. There's a lot of money going in to make sure these projects get done. We're working on an interconnected regional fiber network. We started on the south side. The next step is Peninsula, and we'll connect that through to the HRPDC, and we'll work towards the rural areas. But this will ensure that there's high-speed broadband internet access for people all through Hampton Roads and businesses as well. There's a Birthplace of America Trail that we're working on to connect with the Capitol Trail, which is really exciting. You know, quality of life is such an important component of why people want to live here and stay here. And, you know, trails, people, when you look at survey, trails is one of the number one things that people want to bike, they want to walk, they want to run, they want to be outside and taking advantage of that. We've really kind of, We've worked on a couple components with respect to how we work on economic development, and site readiness is one of those things. You know, we used to try and attract people to the region, say, you know, come locate your business here, we want you here, and they would say, okay, where can I set up my business? And we look and there's no place. So we were trying to sell from an empty wagon, and we really took a look at that and said, how can we change this? So we worked on site readiness. Hampton Roads really took a stab at this, and then the Commonwealth followed suit and said, this is a good plan. We're doing good things here, so we're really trying to build up a network of sites that we can use to attract business. We're working on offshore wind supply chain. We're uniquely suited on the East Coast to really bring offshore wind, not only develop the parts for Hampton Roads, but develop the parts and the supply chain all up and down the East Coast. We've got a revenue sharing model in place right now that I'm really excited about, that allows local governments to work together. Federal initiatives, super excited about Jefferson Labs, trying to attract a supercomputer. Could be a couple thousand jobs associated with that, but that's a terrific asset for the region. The restructured regional model for economic development, you know, this is something that we're always fighting with, working together regionally to attract outside companies and grow companies from within. Working together as a region makes the most sense. That's how regions do it, and we've really kind of restructured that, I think, in an exciting way. And then finally, the transit backbone, the 757 express route. You know, one of the things that's really important in growing our economy is making sure that people have access or can get to work, and the transit backbone will help kind of set up with regularity, 15-minute intervals, people accessing the work locations that they want to get to, and so we're very excited about that. That concludes my comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Grootendorst, thank you for being here. There's certainly a lot in that to digest, a lot of good information for sure. I guess just a couple questions. How do you define labor force?
Well, so labor force, essentially, the easiest way to put that is anybody who wants to work. If they're interested in working, there's actually 6 different definitions of this. We usually go with what's called a U3 definition. But the labor force in general is when they do a survey, they said, are you interested in working? Regardless if you want to or not, are you interested? Say yes, then you're part of the labor force. If you say no, I'm retired, or no, I'm 12, then you're not part of that labor force. Then the second component is like, are you working? So that determines the employment level associated with the labor force.
There just seems to be a disconnect between job availability and high unemployment. How do we get that? Because unemployment, I guess, is part of is of people who are willing to work, I guess, but how do they determine unemployment? Is that number of benefits that are provided?
So the unemployment is through that same survey. They ask you if you're working, or they ask you if you want to work, and if you say yes, and they say, are you working, and you say no, then you would be considered unemployed. Now, there's other categories of question that determine the level, but essentially, if you are looking for a job, or if you want a job, and you're looking for one, then you would be considered unemployed. That's the easiest way to.
Sure. And so we hear often about companies, particularly on the peninsula, that are looking for people to work. So why aren't they able to fill those positions with these unemployed folks? Is it purely training, education? What is it that you see?
So there's different kinds of unemployment, but what we're seeing right now is what's called structural unemployment, right? So if you used to be a plumber, and well, plumber is the wrong one because we can't find enough plumbers anyways, but you could, for example, be a computer program who got laid off, right? And a job opening for a plumber comes up, well, you can't necessarily be a plumber. So it's called structural unemployment when the jobs that are available are not in the same place. When I showed the changes in industry employment, if you get laid off from one industry, it doesn't necessarily mean you can work off in another industry. So structural unemployment is part of that, and that typically takes a while to overcome. That's training, education, people essentially letting go of what they were working on and changing their profession. But there's also other components. One of the big ones is childcare. That's what we saw coming out of COVID, right? When the school shut down, then there was this rush, well, who's going to take care of my children at home? And when people dropped out of the workforce to take care of their own children, they have been slowly coming back into the workforce. But the cost of childcare coupled with the availability of childcare prevents people from working too. So you can say, yes, I'm looking for a job, but I need one that's flexible where I can work from home so I can continue to care for my children. That would be in other aspects. But there's multiple layers of that. So it's not just a simple, here's one or two answers. It's really getting people to fill positions that are available in fields that they want to work in, that they're trained in, that they're skilled for, and with the flexibility that fits into the lifestyle that they have, especially as it relates to childcare. That's on the peninsula especially, it's one of the big struggles in trying to fill positions is, they did a survey a couple years back on the peninsula, what's the number one thing that small businesses need in order to increase their production? And they said, we need our employees to have access to childcare. That's not something you'd expect from small business, but that's a big component of it as well. But there's a number of those, and with that structural imbalance, it usually takes a while for us to fill the jobs that are available, moving across industries and across professions.
I appreciate that response. Thank you. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Grootendorst, for being here today and for your presentation, detailed presentation, and there's a lot of information in there. There's some things to be cautious about, but there's some things to be excited about, and we're gonna hold you to Hampton Roads is gonna be better than the national in 2023. So, thank you again for being here and for the information.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Ms. Kern-Scheerer?
Yes, just thank you. That was a lot to digest, and I appreciate having someone with your expertise really breaking it down in a way that, you know, really makes sense and as much as it can. So thank you so much for your clear explanation of so many things that you know elude me when I am just reading, you know, kind of information at large. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you also for being here in the presentation. I think we all learned a lot. I do have a couple questions. So Mayor Pons asked about the labor force, and you said that you sort of survey and take those who want to work. So what of people who should be working but don't want to work? Where do they fall? Like if they're looking for that perfect job and living in their parents' house until that perfect job comes up, where do they fall? I mean, obviously they're unemployed, but they should be working and could be working if it maybe wasn't what exactly is perfect.
Yeah, so if you're not looking for a job, then you're not part of the labor force. It's that simple. So there are, you know, we're trying to understand, especially with some of the youth, you know, we expected a lot of retirees when COVID hit. A lot of people that were close to retirement age, they dropped out of the workforce and they didn't come back. So we see that drop from the labor force. They were part of the workforce. They said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm out. And so they didn't come to that. So that's a big chunk of what we saw. You know, the people of retirement age didn't come back. So now kids that are in your house that won't go to work, you know, yeah, those people essentially, if they're not looking for a job, if they're not interested in gaining employment, then they're not part of the labor force. Hopefully at some point they will be, you know, this is a productive component. But a lot of that too is, you know, I think one of the things that we've seen with this tight labor market is companies are really attractive right now. So my daughter started at a restaurant a couple years ago. She was making minimum wage, $7.35 an hour. Now she's making $20 an hour. 2 years difference. I mean, her wages have gone way up, and that showed my son, hey, I want to get out there and I want to make that kind of money too. Certainly, he's already started where he's making twice what she was when she was on minimum wage. So I think what you're seeing is, in order to get the labor force, companies are being forced to pay more, and when they pay more, it could draw people into the workforce, draw people into the labor force. No longer is it worth it to do nothing, especially when your friends have money and they can spend money on stuff. You can make good money. So I think it's just, you know, it's a slow process, but we've seen actual real wage growth in some areas, especially on the lower end. Where we hadn't seen wage growth in a long time, and that's really slowly pulling people back into the labor force. But we're also seeing that now, starting to see that with more mid-level jobs, where we're not competing with other regions. Usually what we do in Hampton Roads is we steal from other localities in Hampton Roads because we don't compete with regions outside of Hampton Roads because we don't pay enough. But now we're being forced to be competitive with not only the Richmonds, but you know, the Atlantas, the Buffaloes, the other regions. If you want to come to Hampton Roads, we're going to have to pay you more. And if we start paying people outside more, we're going to have to pay people who with existing jobs here more. So we're actually seeing wage growth come up. That'll bring people into the workforce.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. And on page 7 of your chart, you showed indexed employment and the fact that Hampton Roads was lower than the rest of Virginia and the United States. Do you have any thoughts on the reason why for that, other than what you were just saying about where we pay in certain categories?
Well, yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons for it. One of them is the job sectors that are hiring and the ones that we have here. You know, we are a heavy government side. And so if we're not seeing the wages that are attractive to, especially across the nation, that we're not going to be able to compete for those jobs. But we also have industry sectors that just weren't seeing the same growth that industry sectors in other areas outside Hampton Roads saw, so those industries grew quicker. Even for our industries here, like I mentioned, tourism, we saw growth when the nation didn't. But some of the business and service sectors, which are larger in places like Charlotte and Raleigh and New York, they've seen growth. Well, we don't have a strong presence there, so we're not seeing that same growth. The other strange part about this, and I mentioned it briefly, is a big part of our employment that does come from the federal government, especially uniformed military personnel. So traditionally, when the federal government is hiring uniformed military personnel, it bumps up our employment with our military employment, but also our other employment areas that the induced component of that come in. Right now, the federal government is not bringing military personnel in because they're having a difficult time bringing them, finding them, hiring them. So that also hinders our growth.
And just one last question for the military that are leaving the military members. How well are we doing in terms of keeping them here to fill some of the job openings that we have? Do you have any sense of that?
So this is something we've struggled with in years past, right? So many people leave the military and they're qualified, they're fantastic workers, and we don't have a job set up for them now. But we have been working collectively as a region, especially through the Workforce Council, to really kind of fix that gap. And they say, you need to be talking to these potential retirees 2 years before they retire. If you wait for them, nobody leaves the military and then, as soon as they turn their stuff and they're like, now what am I going to do, right? They've been thinking about this for years. So they know where they're going before they retire. So what we're trying to do is connect with them before they retire, show them options that are available here. So I think we're doing a much better job than we have in years past. We have centers set up that are specifically at all the military bases that say, hey, can we find you a job in the region before you leave? And there's a lot of effort underway to prevent kind of that military exit from people leaving the area. So,
thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Grootendorst. It was really informative. I kind of wish my professors in college had added more jokes to their economics presentations. Might have been more interesting. But I had a particular question. The mayor asked about unemployment, and mine was around the labor force. It seems that Hampton Roads is lagging against Virginia and the U.S. in labor force participation as it's changed over time. And I looked at the Fred site a second ago, and I saw that participation rate was 67% in the 90s, 62% today. So I recognize there could be a macro trend of a decreasing labor force, but I think the number you'd have had a 4.5% decrease in labor force participation since the pandemic. And I'm just curious why that could be, because you'd mentioned there was also higher usage at the port, there was hiring along defense industries, and then certainly good tourism, steadiness, if not growth, since the pandemic. So why are we at Hampton Roads more pronounced in our decreasing labor force participation?
well, very astute of you, and congratulations for looking at the Fred site. It's a fantastic site. But labor force participation is kind of a strange thing. We used to be really high with respect to labor force participation in Hampton Roads compared to the nation. But one of the things, demographics plays into this. And what we don't have in Hampton Roads is we don't have a lot of youth that are entering the labor force, where if you look at especially our schools are wondering, well, we have excess capacity across the region because we have very few youth, because we have fewer people, uniformed military personnel that bring their families in the region. So what happens is we're seeing the retirees leave the labor force, as is the nation, but we're not seeing them being replaced by the youth as the nation is. So that's one of the reasons that we are not performing as well with respect to the participation rate. The other components, like I said, childcare in this region especially contribute to that. But I think demographics here is really destiny, and watching how the demographics flow through, who's retiring when. We used to be, I would say, a younger region, in that our average age was lower than the nation, lower than other metro areas, but we're catching up to the national average, so we're aging quicker, which means that the impact that we have on retirees, people that are leaving the workforce, means that our labor force our participation rate is shrinking.
Okay, that's really interesting. I know of a couple local efforts to maybe try to address that. I found the 757 campus website the other day that HRPDC is probably aware of, trying to convince grads to stay in the area, introduce them to jobs. And then I know some of our universities, William and Mary certainly, are trying to invest in military personnel who are retiring and then looking at going into the workforce or obtaining that graduate degree or certificate, and they've invested in a new office of veteran affairs, something to the sort. So I'm sure you all are aware of those efforts, but thanks for providing a bit of color there.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Greg, thank you for coming. I appreciate you making the journey over here. I assume you live over on the other side of the bridge tunnel and you work over there, but certainly good to have you here and good to have the presentation. And I think everybody on council and those watching gained a lot from having you here, so we appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, takes us to City Council communications. Are there any communications, Mr. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I have one thing, Mayor. On January 17th, I had the opportunity to represent City Council at an event to recognize the National Day of Racial Healing. That event was organized by the local chapter at Coming to the Table, and during that event, they handed out their first Table Builders Award. So the Coming to the Table organization wanted to recognize the Williamsburg City Council for creating the first ever Truth and Reconciliation Committee. So they presented us with a nice plaque for doing that work, but I did share with them in accepting the plaque on behalf of City Council that there were other members there, Mr. Braxton was there, that the committee's the one that's actually doing the work. We just set the process in place to form the committee, but they're actually the ones that are doing the hard work. So they wanted to recognize our committee on Truth and Reconciliation.
Thank you.
I have one
Yes,
as
sir.
well. For anyone interested or who may be listening at home, there will be the dedication of the Bray School at Colonial Williamsburg at 2 p.m. on Friday. Really a momentous event, a recognition of some history that we have recently discovered in Williamsburg and want to commemorate. So I recommend folks show 2 p.m. Friday the 10th for the Bray School's dedication.
Thank you. Ms. Kern-Scheerer, anything?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, takes us now to schedule of meetings. You all have on your agendas. It's on the public website if you wanted to see the schedule of things happening for February. It's there for your observation. So if there's no other additions to that, we'll go next to open forum, which is an opportunity for anybody to come forward, address council. Seeing no one, we'll close the open forum, and it takes us to adjournment. Is there a motion?
So I move that we adjourn.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kern-Scheerer?
Aye.